Oh my gosh, this is a great start. Happening now. We'd like to welcome our viewers from across North America and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room, episode 281 for January the 18th, 2023. My name is Wes Fryer, and I'm coming to you from Charlotte, North Carolina, where it is not actually snowing, as my virtual background would make it look, but it has been another lovely January day. I told Jason I was just taking a nap before we started, so maybe it wasn't a good thing to let me take the microphone first. But joining me as always is Dr. Jason Neiffer. I am so used to seeing a mane of hair, Dr. Neiffer, that I almost don't recognize you.
Yep, high and tight. And in fact, last week I picked up my fourth haircut since I cut it all off. So I'm trying to commit to being a little more put together, especially now that it's one thing when you're the number two guy in the background. It's a whole other thing when suddenly you're expected to be the public face of something. But hey, I'm joining you tonight from Missoula, Montana, where I am the executive director of the Montana Digital Academy, which is Montana State Virtual School, located on the beautiful University of Montana campus. And it's funny because last hour I was talking with my friends from NCCE, planning a little bit about our conference that's going on in late March. By the way, go to NCC_EdTech on Twitter to find out more and register for said conference in beautiful Tacoma, Washington. And I'm the closing keynote for that conference, I might add, which is something I'm super excited about. I got a really fun hour planned with my good friend and collaborator, Mike Agustinelli, who's been on the podcast before. But I was talking about AI for the whole hour. So I feel like I'm just transitioning to now another hour where we will chit chat about AI for the whole hour. Although I did very purposefully go a little more minimalistic this week on the AI links, even though I feel like every week there's a new set of interesting things to know about AI technology. So, Wes, I don't think the show's about AI, at least it's not right now. Give it 10 minutes. But what is the EdTech Situation Room all about?
Well, we are here, as we have been for 280 previous episodes, to talk about the tech news and to shoot the articles that we've seen in the past week through an educational lens or prism and give our analysis and basically just have an excuse to hang out for, an hour. Which, I was thinking about it, Jason. This is just one of the wonderful continuities of life, is that here we've uprooted our family and gone across the country, but hey, Wednesday nights are Wednesday nights. So It really is a blessing. Tonight, and if everyone will visit edtechsr.com/links, you can access this Google Doc, which has all of our show notes from episode 201, I think, to present. We had to switch Google Doc. But we're going to be talking tonight, as Jason said, about AI, Google, Apple, privacy, the tech correction or social media, as we have often discussed it with TikTok and Twitter and other such companies and articles. We're going to talk Microsoft, a little recap of CES, connectivity, copyright and licensing, and the wonderful miscellaneous category, in which it looks like we may talk about the FAA's travel chaos that happened a few weeks ago, and then also a cyber war Ukraine article, which actually is a little old, but was pretty good. So we will end with some Geeks of the Week. Where would you like to start tonight, Dr. Neiffer?
Well, Wes, from one rabbit hole to another, I'd like to talk about new Apple stuff, which traditionally in the past might have actually sucked up a whole half an hour on our show. We'll see how quickly we do tonight. But there was I think a last minute announced event. It was not something that we had several weeks of warning about, but there was an Apple event on Monday of this week, and there was more in that event than was expected. So I'll just quickly highlight what is now available. The M2 chip, which was released in 2022, that was, I believe, in just the MacBook Air, if I remember correctly. The MacBook Air M2 was available, and it was, better than the M1. But part of the problem with Apple switching architecture as they have, and this is not really a problem, but it's a bit of a sales problem for them, is that there's no way they're ever going to repeat the gains of going from Intel to the the Apple Silicon architecture. So it was just so monumentally ahead of where Intel was. I think Intel is making some inroads again, but the bottom line is that the M1 chip represents such huge gains in productivity, such huge gains in battery life, such huge gains in graphics performance. There are still issues with the N1 platform, but I know that it's largely brought me back. And in fact, now that I think about it, all of my Mac life now is got an M1 chip in it, and I love it. It's super great. But the four things that were released include an M2 Mac Mini, which the Mac Mini platform did pick up. It was an early M1 product, and it is now starts at $599, which is just an extraordinary value. It's $100 less than the Mac Mini M1 at its base model. It has 2 more graphic cores in it, although a similar amount of RAM and a similar amount of storage space. But I am using the almost base model at home of the M1, and it is not showing even the smallest sign of being anything but continue to be a real a barn burner from the standpoint of being fast. So it starts at $599, $600 total, and then they span up to where you can also get an M2 Pro chip, which has 10 core CPU cores and 16 cores of GPU, and I believe also starts at 16 gigabytes of memory for just $1,300, which is actually, in my humble opinion, also a steal, because the graphics performance on these machines is so extraordinary. I would also note for the record that in my mind, you don't have to get a new Mac desktop every year. You just don't. That you buy these devices, and they last for 4 or 5 years before you're even thinking about updating. And I know this is both true of both me and Dr. Fryer. We've utilized dated Macs. In fact, Wes, what vintage of Mac are you broadcasting on tonight?
Well, Jason, thanks to your Geeks of the Week, which have breathed new life into my 2011 27-inch iMac, I'm using my school M1 Mac, but I am using Sidecar to connect to my really large screen. So yeah, it's a 12, 13-year-old machine that's
Yep.
doing great. And I could continue to use it, but actually, being able to use in an extended display, setup is fantastic. So you're going to see a little bit of lag every once in a while with the XSplit VCam, using my iPhone 14 as the webcam. But it's tremendous and it's phenomenal. And I don't know when I would need to get rid of this computer, since it, continues to chug along quite well.
Yeah, totally. And that's the thing about Macs, right? Is that they do tend to have longevity to them. And I know some geeks that are literally utilizing MacBooks with the plastic clamshell MacBooks from back in the day, and are perfectly happy with it. In some cases, they've installed Linux onto it, or utilized the hack we had talked about earlier about getting the new version on it. And it's not going to be very fast in comparison to the modern Macs, but they last for a while. And then 2 other releases. There's a Mac Mini, 14 or 16-inch MacBook Pro, which now has that M2 chip on it, and that's in the form factor of the new Mac Pros. So that's the same as the Mac Pros with the extended chips on there, and these have M2 Pro and M2 Max chips on them. And from all accounts, there is a pretty extraordinary amount of good design and raw power in these new MacBooks. And the 14, for example, it does start at pretty significant $1,700. But the bottom line is that, and actually I'm looking, nope, I'm sorry, it starts at $1,900, although I'm looking that Newegg is selling the newest model for $300 less, so it's already on sale. So that's super interesting. But the bottom line is that this is the same thing, that you invest $2,000 in a base model MacBook. unless you are the person that needs a laptop every 1 or 2 years because you like using the newest stuff, you're not going to have to update this for 4, 5, 6 years. And probably even then, it's going to be battery life more than anything else that's probably going to get you to move. So that's an interesting piece too. And then one thing that actually tempts me for the very first time in the existence of this line, there is a new HomePod, which Apple has a line of smart speakers that are called HomePods. Everyone, including yours truly, made fun of the original HomePod because it's a $300 freaking smart speaker, right? So what possibly would you need out of that? But they so happen to add in a bunch of interesting features to it, not the least of which is the ability to kind of sense rooms so that it changes the way it directs music based on this. But also they can hook up to HomePod minis, which have sensors in them, including moisture and temperature sensors. And then it's just starting to blow my mind just a little bit about what's possible here. But I don't think I mentioned this in the podcast, but my wife and I are at the end of a 3-month project to update our kitchen. We've been literally saving up for 7 years to. We totally gutted our kitchen out. During that time period, we haven't had a kitchen, which has been frankly terrible. Both my wife and I picked up COVID for the first time in November. Had no kitchen during that time period, and a lot of things have been really slow, but we have a shelf in there that we were going to put, we were going to buy a really nice a tabletop speaker, and we were thinking about a Bluetooth speaker to do that. We were looking for a nice one, and like a really nice one, like an investment that's going to be there for 10, 15 years. And we found one, but we're thinking about actually maybe getting the new HomePod for that because it's a nice speaker. We want it to go in our nice kitchen. So, Wes, a lot of me talking there. What's tempting to you as an Apple guy with what was announced by Apple this week?
Because I have a new phone, pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, it is lovely to have the capabilities that come with a phone, a large phone that I can shoot all kinds of video with. So honestly, I'm not tempted. Peggy had put into the show notes a question as far as the mini, and I'm trying to look it up on the store right now. If you can order it with a 2 gig memory, and yes, indeed, Peggy, you can get two. Oh, you're talking about RAM, 2 terabit. I'm so behind the times. Okay, right. You can order it. It comes standard with 512 gigs, but you can get it with 1, 2, 4, or 8 terabytes of data. So it's just phenomenal. I don't think I'm tempted at all. I've sort of violated my own rule by saying, "Oh yes, older phones are great," but I don't know. I mean, the show is definitely an influence on me. Maybe it's an influence on others, and it does. From time to time cause me to have some lust for other products, but I don't think I'm ready to jump at anything yet. Let me ask you the watch question, because I'm still on a Gen 3 watch. Persuasive reasons to move to the newer watch?
The new sensors I think are pretty nice, and this includes a blood oxygen sensor, which is a useful piece of data, especially in the era of RSV and COVID. I would note, in fact, I was keeping a close eye on my blood oxygen as I was recovering for COVID because of my health sensitivities, and I do think it's worth it. But the Gen 6 is when the pulse ox is available, and as it turns out, you can buy those pretty decently used. And in fact, I had a third party band because I wanted something that was this is a blue watch. I don't know if I'd buy the blue again. I sometimes commit some fashion crimes because my blue watch and blue band don't match what I'm wearing quite frequently. This band is starting to fall apart. It's been almost 3 years. Is that right? It has been almost 3 years since I've purchased this watch. I'm sorry, 2 years since I purchased this watch, and this band has been on my arm every day. Not only does it smell unfortunate, the bottom line is that it was not a super nice band in the first place. But I think you could probably pick up a used 6th generation for a song.
I'd love to know what your choices are with bands and whatnot. I had picked up on sale at Target a band that really made my Apple Watch look like a very nice metal, much
Yeah.
more expensive watch, and it worked great. And then over Christmas, it just stopped working. So I had to dig out my original band that came with it, which honestly is fine. And I don't know that it's really been that big of a deal. But anyway, it's yeah. I the HomePod's interesting. I don't have this as a geek of the week, but for the last probably at least 3 years with a smart home, I've had our Christmas lights come on automatically. I made a YouTube video over the 3-day weekend of pardon me, my setup for how I use the Google Home smart speakers with these Wi-Fi smart um, plugs, which incidentally have Chinese firmware that is in Mandarin, and I'm like hoping it's not malware. I can't even read it when I update it. Anyway, I posted that to the web. I'm pretty doggone happy with my Google universe and with all of our devices. And once you're invested in an ecosystem like that,
Yeah.
it's a significant thing. It's like switching phones or switching computers. You've invested in this. So I know you're running a hybrid. In terms of Montana, Jason, I'm pretty sure you would be in a Guinness Book of World Records. Number of screens in the home, number of active Wi-Fi devices. Maybe you're pushing the
Yeah,
envelope
maybe
with that.
so. Yeah, and of
So
course, it doesn't help that I buy random things off of eBay, like this beautiful Lenovo laptop, which I really had no need for, but it was a super screaming price on eBay. I and that's the ecosystem thing. I don't think we've actually ever had this conversation. Dr. Fryer and I are married, not to each other, but to
folks, we've got an announcement. No, just
yeah,
kidding.
yes. By the way, a special announcement this week. But I don't know about you with Shelly, but my wife Allison, I mean, she's tolerant of my sometimes elaborate setups with things. But I also know that even if it's cool, if I don't set it up to be pretty user friendly, it gets abandoned. And I also think that voice assistants have become slightly less interesting and maybe not part of my daily workflow as I expected them to. But I do have two systems inside the house. We do have a couple of Google devices, and we have a pretty decent number of Amazon devices. And my wife is used to those Amazon devices. We need to have a conversation. Apparently, the new HomePod, the big home $300 HomePod, is a better Siri experience, and they keep updating that firmware to make it a better Siri experience. But the bottom line to me is that I'm not going to make that decision without having a long conversation with Allison, because obviously it's left up to me to come up with the technical things in our house, and she is a pretty solid nerd in her own right, just not the technology variety. So I'm left to do that. And so one of the decisions we're gonna have to make is that if we do put a really nice HomePod speaker in our kitchen, our brand new kitchen, it might be super cool, but if she doesn't use it, then that's a lost opportunity. So that'll be one of the ways we'll have the discussion in my home.
For the record, Jason, isn't your mom the one with the YouTube channel about quilting or something?
It's not my mom. It's Mike Agustinelli's mom, actually.
Okay, all right.
But Nerd does run our family. My mom was the first person, one of the first people in Great Falls, Montana, to run a computerized bookkeeping business in the 1980s. And in fact, the computer she was using was so old, it was running CPM. Which was kind of a pre-DOS operating system that kind of worked like DOS, but she had something called a K-Pro 4 back in the day with its 10 megabyte hard drive that you could only afford used. That was the early days for her on the internets.
Hey, welcome to not only Peggy George, but also Betsy Springer, who's joining us again. And look at this. Betsy bought an iPad for her daughter for Christmas on Swappa after she heard us plug the website here on the show. And that is absolutely fantastic. Jason, Peggy is asking, should she be using Swappa for getting a newer Apple Watch?
Well, first of all, I was in a virtual happy hour with Betsy earlier tonight with the Digital Learning Collaborative. So it's been a good meeting day for me today. The Peggy, I think that's where I would buy it. I've had 100% luck on Swappa, and I've bought maybe 12, 13 things there. Some of them for me. I bought my wife's Updated iPhone on there is about a year used. My parents' phones come from there. So my parents' tech come from there, and then I bought an iPad there. Yeah, I've had a great experience there. You want to look around a little bit. It's like any other, social selling site like that you want to be thoughtful about. The who you're buying it from, but Swappa has all sorts of guarantees built into it, and I usually find if I shop for a couple of days or even a week or two, I just wait for the right price to come along, then I'm good to go.
I would definitely echo what you said as far as just like with Airbnb, or I don't do a lot of shopping on not Etsy, but what's the auction site? Man, I'm telling you, the brain is
eBay.
going. Thank you, eBay. So anyway, yeah, you want to be aware of that. In terms of your version, Peggy, just I think if you look if you're in your watch app in your iPhone, it should tell us, what you have. I don't think really the version 2 is worth staying with. So I'm on a 3 and I'm super happy with it. And we've got, members of our family on all the other versions in addition to that. So that's why I'm just wondering, do I need to update? And I know the sensors and stuff like that would be cool, but I mean, at this point, it's not going to make that much of a functional difference. So, all right. Well, hey, there we go. Talking Apple stuff. Oh, is there more?
Yeah, let me make one more other comment here that is more directly related to schools. I cannot think of a better bargain than a $599 Mac Mini M2 that even in 8 gigs of RAM. And by the way, I would be the guy that would usually get 16 gigabytes of RAM on something. And in fact, now that I think about it, all but one of my Mac devices does have 16 on it. But I did buy a MacBook Air last year, a personal one, on super duper discount, even though it was new. And the thing that was super great about it was that it only had 8 gigabytes of RAM, and I can tell the difference between an 8 gigabyte Windows laptop and a 16 gigabyte Windows laptop because of the unified memory architecture in the new Macs with the Apple Silicon. It's a better experience with less RAM. And so, I know that Macs have had a troubling past with a lot of tech directors because of their sheer expense. But I think that you can legitimately buy a $599 M1 a Mac Mini. I'm sorry, M2 Mac Mini. And by the way, the M1s are going to start going on huge discount too, which would also be a fabulous deal. And you could get not 5, 6, 7 years out of service, but at the last 3 years, people are complaining how slow it is. You can legitimately get 5, 6, 7 years of high-end power user experience with that particular platform. And I'm just really excited about the notion of being able to buy this so inexpensively, which I think is clearly aimed at schools.
Absolutely. All right. Well, because I know we're going to get into AI and the tech correction, because we only have like 300 articles. No, not that many, but we have a lot of them. I want to just jump down to the one that I threw into the miscellaneous. This is an excellent article. And it's about cyber war, Russia, and the Ukraine. This comes to us actually from Microsoft, from Brad Smith, who I do not know, but is identified in the byline as vice chair and president. It's called Defending Ukraine, Early Lessons from the Cyber War. Now, this is actually an article from June. So a heck of a lot has transpired in Ukraine, since June. But I don't know. But for myself, I think I tend and have tended to not think quite as much about Russia's cyber capabilities. I think that maybe a lot of folks just the hoopla over the 2016 elections and Brexit and so many, things, the investigations that we had into all of that kind of stuff, sort of washed over. And what are they up to? Wow. This from a historical standpoint, because I do love history. It talks about the beginnings of different wars and how it has taken time to go back to see exactly how did American Civil War start and how did World War I start and what happened with World War II and how did Germany justify the invasion of Poland. And so that's what it's telling a story about with Ukraine in terms of the cyber operations. But it's talked about a lot of capabilities and how this is shifted and changed. how cyber, is a persistent and ubiquitous threat. This is not something that is just unique right now to the fact that Russia is having an offensive war against the Ukraine. And I think it's super important for us to understand this because we are literally not only in the middle of like a psychological operation where agents of China and Russia, and we are as well. Like we're conducting different kinds of cyber operations as well as psychological operations, but it's in this landscape that we are all living in and we're consumers in, and it's just really wild. So anyway, I want to recommend that, and I do think that it seems that people are surprised. I think I've read some other articles, maybe I've shared them in the show, that Russia hasn't been able to launch more devastating attacks, but I think some of that has to do with how Putin didn't really talk to a whole lot of folks apparently before starting the attack. And cyber operations different from kinetic operations. You can't really just say okay, let's go, and it takes build up and in terms of what people have to do to compromise systems and be able to deploy things. And so it's something that could take more time, but it continues to fascinate me that there is this intersection with the conversations we have as teachers and administrators and just also members of our family about things like internet safety and passwords and protecting ourselves. And I don't know that independently any of us are going to make any kind of significant change in the broad scheme of things with any password managers and security that we put in place, but we certainly can do positive things for not being the victim of identity theft and possibly avoiding a lot of real painful experiences for ourselves and for members of our family. So anyway, I thought that was a very worthwhile article, and it's just really, really well written. And it's interesting. I mean, of course, with Microsoft, they talked about how the on-premise systems are the things that they are most focused on, and that the cloud-based systems are more secure. And from a school standpoint, to just grab my tech director hat off of the shelf there, I mean, transitioning my previous school where I was a tech director for 4 years from a situation where we had something like, I don't know, 15 or so on-premises servers to just like 2 or 3, and everything else was running in the cloud, where dedicated professionals that were able to have teams 24/7 patching, maintaining, checking for cyber intrusions, basically defending the gates. That's just super important. So if your school happens to be one that still has a number of on-premises systems for instance, security, for local retention of surveillance video and opening and closing doors, things like that. There's reasons why you need to have some on-premises machines, and there's also vulnerability that you have when everything's in the cloud and it's all dependent upon an internet, and you want things to still work when the internet might be interrupted for a little while. But anyway, all those things are important to think about. I'm happy to not be responsible for those things at my school anymore and just be responsible for our house. But there's, considerations to think about there too, as far as our homes, the more digital we become and the more dependent that we become on technologies.
Well, and we talked about this a little bit last week. Both Dr. Fryer and I both strongly recommend that you use a password manager. And our previous recommendation, which was LastPass, something that I was paying money for monthly, has had some issues. But it's so in the weeds, right? Chances are, if you were not reading technology media, you would have never known that LastPass was hacked and what that has mean for that. But it just tells you the complexity of this, right? Like if you're anything like, anyone that's decently net connected with things like your finances, the really bottom line is that there's a lot of risk out there. And the more you can do to just be thoughtful about how you're doing things and limiting your access to services, using good passwords, using a password manager, not LastPass, to be able to take care of that. It's a really important part of this, and it's all related to that, right? Like these are all, it's a big macro thing that's going on in the war in Ukraine, but the other half of that is what's happening daily in people's personal lives.
And we won't do the deep dive this time. I think we talked about it last show. To be clear, the LastPass archives or whatever were breached, but everyone's passwords were not in the clear and haven't been compromised. But any password that you had, is basically in the hands of bad actors now. And because a lot of data there was saved in the clear, they're able to see which archives had the most attractive targets or the most possible accounts that could be breached. And so they can use brute force techniques in order to crack that password. And so that speaks to the importance of the master password, the importance of the uniqueness of the password, but also needing to have a password manager that can help us readily keep track of the passwords that we have changed, etc. I'm very thankful at this point that LastPass was the password manager I used professionally for my last job. So basically, that's all stuff that I'm not having to worry about anymore. But yeah, it's still recommended that we use a password manager. Choose wisely, and anything can be breached. One of the articles I shared about Chinese hacks, I think it was a Wired article a couple episodes ago. I mean, it almost makes it seem like game over because they have compromised so many different things and so many different systems that are just vast. But anyway, we can't give up, and we need to continue to try to do our best to protect our stuff, and also talk to students about this, because this is a major employment opportunity in the world of cybersecurity. Not only for Space Force and military operations and Homeland Security and people that are in law enforcement, but anybody who's part of any organization. And I said this time because I read it a long time ago, but in the not too distant future, maybe now, just like boards need finance experts and people who are savvy about physical security and other kinds of things, depending on the organization, we're going to have to have cyber experts. And even if it's the person to be able to ask questions, about penetration testing, about the ways in which, servers are tested and secured and things like that. It's important to have that knowledge. And, it's not something that's just going to be for a very, very limited number of people. A lot of folks need that personally. Everybody needs that personally. And a lot of people are going to need that professionally as well. Okay, Jason, where would you like to take us next?
Well, I have a suggestion. There's a couple of interesting, one's interesting, one's funny article about copyright and licensing. And then I think we should dive into the tech correction social media stuff. So
Great.
Two quick articles. I know one you'll have a lot to say about, Wes. John Deere announced that they have finally relented, and they're going to allow farmers to fix their own tractors after all. This is from Ars Technica on January 9th. And this has to do with the so-called right to repair. And something, if you work in IT in your district, you're going to know exactly what we're talking about. But there has been a kind of an evolution over the last 25 years. Computers went from being absolutely and 100% kind of user repairable,
Hackable.
Yeah, really. It's both ways, right? You could fix it, but also you could upgrade it. You could extend it. You can switch parts out, put a better video card in, put more RAM into your computer. And slowly over time, computers have become less and less and less repairable. But what's making that complex is that it's not just the fact that they're hard to repair in some cases or impossible in others, but rather it's that the software doesn't allow you to do it. If you've ever owned a printer where they had a microchip built into your print cartridge and then try to use a third-party cartridge, some cases you can't use it at all. In others, you are warned that you're using a non-standard part that violates your warranty. Well, that's become the reality in an awful lot of vehicles. And in particular, and I know this is the case of a lot of other equipment manufacturers, John Deere had kind of software locked their tractors, and not only didn't make parts available, like OEM, original equipment manufacturer parts, available for sale, the manuals that you would need to be able to figure out how the systems worked were not available. And that has officially ended as of January 2023.
And what's important to note from this is John Deere didn't suddenly, have a leadership change and decide, wow, Steve Wozniak was right. We should be able to hack and, do whatever we want to our devices. This has to do with the Biden administration and executive orders to the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, calling upon them to prevent, quote, unfair anti-competitive restrictions on third-party repair or self-repair items. And it's basically, as the article said, actions in advance of federal rulemaking. So Apple, and we've talked about this too, and I have not read this analysis, but Apple has allowed for things to now be user repairable that before wouldn't. But when Jason and I have taken a look at some of this, it's obscenely complicated beyond what probably 99%, 99.5% of the population out there is going to want to do. And I think perhaps Apple was, reading the tea leaves and seeing what was going to come down the pike with that as well. And so they have been able to make some things user repairable, but doggone it, you're in some cases absolutely not going to want to do
Right.
that. But I think it's a positive move. Does this mean that our printers are going to suddenly, have open, ink cartridges that are going to work and all that kind of stuff? No, it's pretty fascinating to see how intellectual property cross-sects with hardware, with business models of different companies and things like that. I know we are super happy. Did you tell me about HP's subscription model printing, or did I hear about that somewhere else? Maybe I heard about it from somebody else.
I feel like we've talked about that.
Yeah. Anyway, my wife said like last night, because she has to print a lot of things for her 5th grade class, and take school. She just loves having essentially is unlimited color and black and white ink, which we've never done before, but we're on the subscription model where the printer is smart. And if it's running low, it automatically orders it. We pay like $3 or $4 a month or something incredibly reasonable. But of course, if it's not an HP cartridge, then, it's going to know it and detect it. Anyway, we're very happy with HP with this setup, but that's another intersection there. So yes, good decision, John Deere. But thank you, Biden administration, for really pushing that, and it was really a response to the anticipated rulemaking that would be coming down the pike from federal agencies.
Thank you. And I knew you'd have more great information about the right to repair stuff. The other thing I want to highlight, just because I think it's funny, Belarus has legalized pirating media from basically countries it doesn't like. And that list is probably basically everyone except for Russia. So I actually have some experience with the country of Belarus. And in 2003, I was a teacher and debate coach in Great Falls, Montana. And we applied for what was called an Open Society Institute International Debate Exchange. And so they were sending debate teams across the country to countries throughout Eastern Europe for the purposes of, engaging in international conversation. And our team won one of those slots, and we had Belarusian debaters and coaches visiting Great Falls High School for 3.5 weeks. And then in the spring, I joined up with a parent, and we chaperoned 5 debaters of kids from my debate team to Gomel, Belarus, where we stayed with the same families of kids that came with us. It was one of the extraordinary events of my life. I'll never forget it. But part of it is now I know an awful lot about that country, and I would say that Belarus isn't really on the United States' Christmas card list. So for a variety of reasons, it's been challenging there. Not for less reason than for the last 20-something years, they've had what has effectively been an authoritarian ruler in that country. His name is Alexander Lukashenko. Well, I mention this because one of the things so they're announcing that that it's now completely legal there to pirate anything from an unfriendly country, which would include basically most of the countries that are creating any kind of media, including software outside of Russia and Eastern Europe. But I laugh at that because we stumbled into something really interesting when we were in Belarus, which was we went to a kind of a grand mall one day. It's not quite, it's kind of like a department store, except that there were a couple of different department store or like sub stores inside the store. So it's like a big department store, but then there was a separate store on the inside. And so we went that day to the record shop, which was a CD shop in 2004. And they were selling we don't know for sure, but I'm assuming like knockoff copies of albums for a dollar American a piece, right? And we were just blown away by this, right? $1 CDs. This is pre-Spotify. It's pre-streaming media, so getting what is effectively a $15 or $20 uh, uh, thing for a buck was itself really extraordinary. Well, so that was the first week we were there. We discovered that, and then a couple weeks later, we were in a store that was kind of like the local, I don't know, like nerd shop, right? They sold computers. They also sold a variety of media, and one of the media they had was um, they had these CDs, but they weren't CDs. They were actually CD-ROMs, and they didn't include an album. They included everything the artist has ever done in MP3 format. So you could go and buy, the David Bowie CD, and it was every album David Bowie ever put out. Or you got the Beatles album; it's every album the Beatles ever put out, and they were selling those for like 75 cents. So the irony of Belarus taking this broad action when it's clear that they're not enforcing copyright all that closely in that country, anyways.
So, Jason, you have inspired me also to share a couple piracy stories, and perhaps we'll have a show title, Stories of Piracy. In 2007, Shelley and I had a chance to travel to Shanghai, China, for the first time for the Learning 2.0 conference. And Alan November was there, and he had his son with him. And Shelley and Alan's son were not speakers in the conference, and so they had an opportunity to run around to different stores. And one of the things that they discovered were a variety of stores that not only sold CDs, but also DVDs with lots of different, Hollywood films. And what I would say to, Belarus and thinking about this is just be careful when you get on an international flight and when you're going to cross customs, because one of the things which I would be really surprised if they don't still look at as customs officials would be media and whether or not said media is legally produced. And so anyway, the other story that, and I won't, seeing the transcription power, which we talked about last week, and we've been aware of this for a while. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook Live, you can turn on live transcriptions, and anyway, all of our words are there. So I'm not going to be using names. I'm not going to say the name of the person. I'm not going to say the name of the organization, but a fairly significant organization that I worked for in the last 25 years had a staff member who was becoming somewhat notorious for selling pirated versions of DVD series. We're talking Lord of the Rings extended features and all of this. And this was a very savvy tech person. They were eventually fired, thankfully, as happens with a lot of different situations that involve HR and things like that. The way that things happened and reasons are not necessarily announced. But I was glad when there was accountability for that, because it was a ridiculous, right? Absolutely ridiculous. But there was a period of time with Napster and all of that there were a lot of folks that were on the wrong side of the law when it came to things like intellectual property. So I think it's good in today's era that I don't think youth are faced with it. I know that I don't even know the names of all the file sharing, programs, LimeWire, Napster. Those were the things back in the day. Really hazardous in terms of the malware and viruses and dangerous and stuff like that. Yeah, the good old days. I don't know. Definitely the old days.
Yeah.
So anyway, yep, some stories of piracy. So I will not be traveling to Belarus ever, I think, in my life. But that's pretty interesting that you had that fascinating debate experience. And anyway, the tangled webs we weave. Well, Dr. Neiffer, I think we had better, good grief, we have like 20 minutes left. We got to get into tech correction. We got to do some AI. So where do we go next?
Well, a lot of this stuff will hold, but there was one really interesting story last week that that I wanted to cover and we just didn't get to. But Seattle Public Schools is suing social media companies for allegedly harming students' mental health. This is from CNN on January 9th. Samantha Murphy Kelly reporting for CNN Business. And the bottom line is that Seattle filed a lawsuit against several big tech companies, includes Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, YouTube, and Facebook. And the claim is that sorry about that. That uh, it's making their jobs harder because teens have access to all the social media that make things kind of difficult to deal with. So um, w- w- it's a fascinating argument to me because factually I think that's true. I think that social media companies have in a lot of cases made student mental health more challenging, which of course makes teaching and education way more challenging. And we don't really talk about the causes as much as I think we maybe should in regards to the current mental health crisis that really is impacting K-12 schools across the United States. But it's certainly interesting that this is the angle that Seattle Public Schools is taking. So I guess any thoughts there, Dr. Fryer, about either the broad claim or the strategy here?
I think it's fascinating. We need some accountability for misbehavior, and we need to look at both the intended and unintended consequences of social media. Right? How long has it been since most of us watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix, and there was hand wringing and people waving their hands in the air, and then nothing has changed. Which is kind of the pattern with Frances Haugen testifies before Congress, and oh my gosh, Facebook, and we go back to life as usual. So I think we need to have some privacy law in our country, and I think that there needs, especially when it comes to things like these allegations that were brought up a few years ago in The Social Dilemma, that Facebook, i.e. via Instagram, was very aware of impacts that were happening to especially teenage girls with respect to suicidal ideation and actually suicide attempts and things like that, because of the ways that the algorithm was sharing content and was operating. So I'm going to jump down and we'll do two ones quick. Ars Technica on January 11th updated us about Parler. It's been a while. Is it 2-year anniversary since January 6th? It's been 2 years.
Yep, it has.
Wow, how time flies. So after January 6th, there was a lot of talk about Parler and these, and there still is, about alternative social media platforms. This article says that the Parler owner laid off 75% of its staff and has only 20 employees left. We haven't even talked about him, and I hesitate to even mention his name, but I will. But Kanye West was going to go ahead and purchase Parler, and then that fell through. And I've listened to some podcasts relating to that and anti-Semitic things, and wow, what a tangled web that is. But Parler is evidently not going to be the Twitter replacement, doing pretty poorly. And if you haven't investigated that, maybe someday I'll teach a course that really dives into these kinds of things. But as a case study, January 6th and the ways in which social media was used. And then in the case of Parler as a platform where a lot of folks that were at the Capitol, protesting and illegally trespassing and also doing other illegal acts, they hadn't secured their data, and there was just open downloadable troves of video as well as photos and images, which were grabbed not only by law enforcement, but by also, I guess we could say, digital vigilantes, good, I think in this case, well-intentioned citizens who wanted to help bring these people to justice. And yes, indeed, that media has played a critical role in many of the indictments and prosecutions that we've seen following January 6th. So anyway, that was a little update about Parler. And then this is a fantastic article by Matthew Ingram. Matthew Ingram was one of the employees of GigaOM. As I've mentioned before on the show, I recreate the GigaOM experience with my own Twitter list following the GigaOM authors. But he penned this article for the Columbia Journalism Review on January 12th. It's called "Is Twitter Dying? And What Would That Mean for Journalism?" And again, we live in such a polluted and fractured media environment that sometimes it's a little hard to keep track of things. And he's done a great job summarizing, what's the big deal with Twitter, with Elon Musk, and what he's done, and the trajectory there. And he also documents talking about, I don't know if you realize this, Jason, in November, Twitter was losing $4 million a day.
Wow.
And, this idea that they're going to be able, with verification or with these other, kind of crazy ideas. I mean, investors are thinking that Elon Musk has a golden touch, right? And he's going to, just as he did with SpaceX, and just as he did with Tesla and his other companies, he's going to be able to turn things around. Well, $4 million a day is a lot of money to lose. And there was another article I don't think we put in about, the debt note that is about to come due. The amount of money that Musk has to have for debt service is really, really, astounding. But the point that he makes here, and he quotes Dan Gilmore, who's a journalism professor at Arizona State. His argument is that journalists should avoid centralized platforms like Twitter altogether. That Musk, I'll just read this, in demonstrating his contempt for free speech in general and journalism in particular with his behavior at Twitter, has shown why, quote, it is foolhardy for anyone to rely on centralized platforms to create and distribute vital information. But what Ingram points out is that journalists want their stuff to be read, right? News organizations need to reach an audience. And so Twitter is still an extremely important and relevant platform for being able to get eyeballs on your content. And so there are ethical and moral questions that not only journalists face, but I think we do as educators and citizens about the platforms we're going to use and who we're going to support. For the record, I no longer pay for Twitter Blue. I did enjoy being able to see who people I follow, the articles they were looking at, but I'm not going to pay a penny to Elon Musk. I'm not going to buy a Tesla. I mean, I am so sickened by what we've seen about this human being that I don't want to support him in any way. I'm thankful that SpaceX has moved forward, our space program and commercial space and things like that. But, I am in the process of I believe, doing a full transition away from Twitter to Mastodon, as well as Facebook, Instagram, other platforms. So fantastic article, great summary of all of what's happening there. But also, pointing out that really a lot of this hinges on what journalists do, because I believe if the majority of journalists would abandon Twitter, Twitter is going to be dead, because that is one of the reasons why it is such a big deal, is that, mainstream journalists can monitor it, and articles and things like that, hashtags, things that trend there can go mainstream. At the same time, if Twitter continues to lose $4 million a day or more or whatever, I mean, anything in that ballpark, it's hard to imagine them being able to survive for very long. So let's all realize, as educators, many of the folks listening to this podcast, are probably Twitter users and may rely on it, that it is very probable that Twitter is not going to continue to survive indefinitely into the future, just from a financial standpoint. They could declare bankruptcy, and that might happen, and there may be still a resurrection, and who knows? Maybe it is going to stick around. But I think there's ethical issues and moral issues for us each to wrestle with in terms of the platforms we use. But there's also real practical ones in terms of reaching an audience. So any thoughts about that, Dr. Neiffer?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it earlier, Wes, that the myth of Musk is very, very powerful, and he has taken some companies and definitely turned them around. Some might question their long-term viability, and there's debates to get in for certain, but yeah, I think the platform probably will survive in some way, shape, or form. It's just that I think you have to ask yourself the question, what do you want out of Twitter? And if, you may think, and it's certainly one point of view, I don't hold it, but it's a legitimate argument to come from, that, Twitter was too big of a company, and they were spending too much time on things that people may say is wasteful or not necessary to run the platform, including the extensive committees they had to review content. Or you could make the argument that what was happening with governments, or what happened with governments and the what someone might call collusion between social media companies and places like the CDC may violate some sense you have as well. But the platform will change. And I didn't share this particular article, or I'm sorry, we don't have time to go into the deep part of this article related to Twitter. But the other thing that we know from the last couple of days is that Twitter has uh, 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 locked out a lot of third-party apps. And it used to be, when Twitter first started, that anyone could access the so-called API and could create all sorts of ways for you to kind of interface with Twitter without having to use the Twitter client itself. And out of that was an extraordinary number of really innovative things. And a lot of those things that are part of Twitter today were kind of invented parts of third-party apps that they kind of brought into the mother system. Well, for the last several years, third-party apps were severely limited, and so the functionality has gone down, and now they're being locked out in some cases. And what the article that I'm sharing tonight is talking about, it's from 9to5Mac yesterday, is that in some cases developers are just being told either no answer or vague answers. And in a lot of cases, they've developed a lot of infrastructure around serving this app up, and Twitter just kind of pulled the rug from under them. And that 9to5Mac article says it's very disrespectful to the developer community. And the developer community is large, and I would imagine likes Twitter quite a bit. And so I think being careful about that is something that Elon Musk is going to have to worry about as well.
Some good dialogue going on in the chat. We had a story here, you have to scroll back a little bit, that Betsy shared that for Martin Luther King Day, she invited her students to write a paragraph dream about kids and their future. And more than one wrote about less tech screen time and their middle schoolers. And that's kind of maybe a sign of the times, thinking about, I love that though, because we need the young people of today to dream about all kinds of things in terms of a better present, and the roles in which, social media and screens play is pretty big. Alexander Slag, who's in the chat, welcome, is also trying to move to Mastodon. It's different user experience. Peggy is asking how in Mastodon do we handle the switch between, from Twitter when connections aren't on. It's not perfect. It certainly isn't. And there's a lot of folks that are not there, and it really does feel like starting over in some ways, but there's also kind of a cool vibe with that. But I think that this is going to continue to be a topic of discussion. But to your point about this article, Jason, in that article and some others, like, it's not accidental. This isn't just like, oh, sorry, we messed up. We fired that person, or that person doesn't work for us anymore, and that didn't work. No, there's some intentionality to what Twitter has done, and it's really, harmful in terms of these companies that have built platforms around Twitter. Ultimately, I guess Twitter's probably hoping to monetize maybe more. They've got to, right? They've got to find ways to not bleed so much money. But Peggy's asking if we stay on Twitter and post on both. I am cross-posting for the most part, but I'm engaging in a lot more conversation. And that's one of the things that I've really enjoyed about Mastodon is I've had a lot more interactions. We're all busy. It's a busy information landscape, but I've found the interactions on Mastodon to be a little bit like the early days of Web 2.0 and that kind of thing. But at this point, I'm not completely abandoning it, but I think that day will be coming soon. I was actually working tonight on my if this then that recipe to take tags that I put EdTech SR to, and then I append those links to a Google Doc that I can transfer for our show. And so anyway, you can make any Mastodon channel into an RSS feed by simply adding .rss to the end of the channel address. And then there's a recipe that you can, take a RSS feed and then, send it to a Google Doc and whatever. So that's geekiness, but it's ways that I've been using social media now for a number of years. As I find articles, I share them, I collect them, and then, we'll take some of them over there. So that's one of the things that I've needed to do before abandoning Twitter is figure out how my workflows can not be dependent on Twitter. And anyway, I'm getting close. Got to talk about an AI article, Dr. Neiffer. We're almost at the end, but
I would say, actually, if you would be willing to share that Tory Trust slide deck, which is excellent.
Yes.
By the way, but I just wanted to share a thread from this week, and I've been talking about AI for 5-6 hours a week for over a month now. And I want to be really clear about something. And I had to say this earlier today too. I'm not the guy that says that this is going to change the world, right? That's just not really how I present to the world. And in fact, if anything, there's been a lot of disappointment in my humble opinion of where technology has taken us. We're doing okay, and I think there's a lot of cool things you can build with technology to support a classroom. But there's some non-technology things that I also have some mojo that are important to talk about. I say that because I believe that generative AI will change education more than anything else in the last 20 years. And that I would almost go back as far as to say Google would be included in that. But in a lot of ways, the kind of search engine model of Google seems so quaint in a world where you can ask a question and it will just generate the answer, not an answer. And so these are a huge deal, right? And so I want to make sure that this is why we keep talking about them, because I think that this year education is going to be significantly impacted. But what I want to share tonight, it's a tweet from Tiffany Pelletier, Dr. Tiffany Pelletier, who is a learning and delivery specialist at Northwest Regional Educational Laboratories, I think, and the NWEA, a not-for-profit leader in advancing student growth and systematic change. So she used ChatGPT to create IEP goals and then provide rationales for the goals. And if this isn't such an extraordinary thing, because it just shows you, like, yeah, it's not perfect right now, but that's an example of a superpower that AI could bring to you as a teacher. And I've been on some of these meetings, writing these goals and the rationales behind them. And it just was, it's tedious work. And that's why that sometimes these documents don't end up as personalized as they should be.
And it's an example of living as augmented humans.
Yes.
If you think you're going to want to go to a doctor in your lifetime from now on, that is not going to want to take advantage of a tool that has read every single research article. What'll be interesting is if the degree to which we can ask the AI to point back at itself in the black box and explain itself. For instance, if your doctor says, "Oh, there's going to be a drug interaction with this," I think the doctor needs to be able to say, "Can you give me the research articles, that indicate this?" To be able to prove, where did you get that information? From what we learned from the OpenAI upper level employee in November that came to our school talking about it, that already is something that ChatGPT and these tools are able to do. But I think that is a great example. We had an after school meeting today where it was mentioned, and we had, I think, one of our administrators sending out a note to at least all faculty and staff, maybe to the entire community in our school, about ChatGPT. And, somebody was saying, "Hey, it can just write any essay for you." And I also point out, yeah, and it can also take any, essay that you have and write that so that a sixth grader could understand it, or, rewrite that for whatever. Our show, not the last one, because I'm still a couple behind, but whatever, what is it, 198, whatever, I don't even remember what it is. Our last show that is on our website, 278, ChatGPT generated summary, took the entire transcript of our entire show and generated a pretty decent summary, which I tweaked a little bit. This will take us just a little beyond the hour, but I want to share two really quick. The first one's not a news article, it's a blog post, but it's by Dutch educator Iris van Rouge. This was on January 14th. And Iris, and I'm not sure pronouns, so I won't guess. Iris says, "Stop feeding the hype and start resisting." And basically, this is an article written in English, which is reminiscent a little bit of the folks that were saying, "Hey, all these Web 2.0 tools that you all, guys and gals, everybody, is just so excited about. Wait a minute, what's the impact? Let's not just leap headlong into it." Iris is saying that we need to be deeply troubled when we see the negative impacts that different AI systems, facial recognition systems, other kinds of as Iris writes, human interlocutors that are imputing meaning where there is none, can be misleading, and it can lead to abuse, and basically there can be a lot of problems. So that's going to be part of the landscape as well. I thought that was a very good sort of contrarian view to take. That wasn't just talking about, hey, it's going to write essays, we've got to block it and ban it and make our lives go back to normal. This was getting a little deeper into some of these issues that are highlighted. And then the one that Jason asked me to share that I put in there is a slide deck from Tory Trust, and this is a tweet that you can take a look at. The only thing I'm, not concerned, but I was like, why did you do a portrait style, layout on this? I'm like, why would you do that? Because anyway, I'm always using a regular standard television or projector, but it's called ChatGPT in Education, and it talks about the basics of ChatGPT, privacy, trustworthiness, the fact that it makes stuff up, free labor, what it can do and not do, what educators can do, and additional resources. And it's a 37 slide Google slide deck. So I think next month I'll be sharing something with our faculty about this. I would also point everyone to Jason's Wakelet that he continues to maintain of resources related to ChatGPT. And let's just go ahead and do another plug for the NCCE conference, because, folks, if you'd really like to hear the wise Yoda of EdTech, the EdTech Yoda of the North, as he's known, I think, just north of the whole Mason-Dixon line, he'll be pontificating upon this in the keynote at NCCE. So
March 21st to 23rd in Tacoma, Washington, and ncce.org/conference 2023 to sign up. And I think the early... Oh, Siri
Siri's going to help you.
Siri checked in tonight. I believe the early bird pricing is ending in a few weeks, so check that out now.
Okay. That has taken us 5 minutes past the show. We've got to do some Geeks of the Week. I do want to let everybody know that you can subscribe to our Substack, which is something that we've just been doing for a little while. But that's a way, if you don't just want to go to the Google Doc, you can see that the articles that we talk about are not only in the live chat, which is archived in both Facebook and YouTube. We're now in the practice of bolding the articles as we talk about them in our show notes. But the Substack newsletter, which you can get when we end up publishing those, which isn't right away. But anyway, you can do that because we've got the links that we talk about as well as those we do not. So, Dr. Neiffer, you have a Geek of the Week for us.
Yes, I'd just like to share kind of a interesting phenomenon. I'm always, in the market for a good USB-C charger, and some of the nicely designed ones, or at least the ones that have novel designs, oftentimes you don't know if it's a legit USB-C hardware or not. And so one of the strategies I've utilized recently is Apple. Now that USB-C charging has been around for several years, you can pick up a used Apple USB-C charger for a song. And I wouldn't just go on eBay and type Apple USB-C charger, because there's a lot of knockoffs on there. But if you limit it down to just used versions of them, you can pick up a 96-watt charger for, if you shop around, for as little as $20, including shipping. And it's not only going to be really high quality, it's going to adjust really well up and down, because there's great hardware sitting inside an Apple USB-C charger. So it's a kind of a little hardware hack, you might say.
Awesome. And Peggy, thanks for asking about that link. I put the link to Jason's AI or his Wakelet about AI and OpenGPT. And lastly, let's end on a positive note. Our school made national news tonight because I'm going to play the audio right there. This is just an absolutely lovely Maker Ed story. So one of our math teachers has a 8-year-old golden retriever who had cancer last year, and Bentley basically faced either losing a front leg or needing to be put down. And so Ashley decided to amputate the leg. And so Bentley's been hobbling around on one leg, and students in one of our high school Maker education STEM classes learned about this and took on the challenge of making a prosthetic leg. So we had news crews at school today shooting this, and it was on the local WCNC ABC affiliate here in Charlotte, North Carolina, and it made the national news. So there's the link. It's very heartwarming, very cool to see students being able to apply their maker and design and creativity skills and aptitudes to be able to solve some problems. And that's pretty cool. So, Dr. Neiffer, when you are not here, where can people connect with you? If, for instance, they might like to connect with you on Mastodon.
Yes, you could go to mastodon.cloud/Neif, Neif, or I'm still kind of kicking on Twitter, Tech Savvy Teach. What about you, sir?
Okay. I am W. Fryer on mastodon.cloud, but you can get all my links at wesfryer.com/after. This has been the EdTech Situation Room, a bit of a longer show because normally we are just an hour and we've got an hour and 8 minutes tonight, but we are on Wednesday evenings at 9 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Mountain, 6 p.m. Pacific, and sometime in the middle of the night UTC. You can check out all of our links and show notes a couple different ways by going to edtechsr.com/links. You can also find the link in our show notes there for each of our episodes to sign up for our what is it called? It's really bad when you're giving the 1AR and your brain just goes blank. Your Substack. Yes, we have a Substack newsletter. And you can get it other ways as well. But Twitter is still a great way to follow us. We're not giving up Twitter. And who knows, maybe we won't give up Twitter. But that's usually the place, as well as on Facebook, when we're going to share any kind of changes, because sometimes we do need to postpone or even cancel a show. But generally, we're here, and we want to thank everybody for your participation. We had 3 folks in the live chat room tonight, so thanks to everybody that joined us there. And if you can join us live, we'd love to have you. Even if you don't, you can always reach out to us. We encourage you to stay savvy, stay safe, and keep sharing resources, because it's one of the transformative ways that we continue to learn in the 21st century. Have a great week.
Good night.